Nobody tells you what done looks like. You've done the journaling, you've sat with the shadow, you've watched relationships fall away, watched yourself become someone harder to reach, harder to read, harder to break. And somewhere in there you started wondering, is this it? Is this what the work was supposed to produce? Or is there still something left to dissolve? Carl Jung spent 40 years documenting precisely what the completed man looks like, thinks like, and moves like. And he left 7 specific markers. Not feelings, markers. Measurable, specific, irreversible shifts that tell you the work is behind you, not still ahead. If you have all 7, you're already there. Let's find out. Here is the lie. That's kept you circling the same ground for years. They told you that inner work is endless, that there is always another layer, always more to heal, always a deeper wound waiting, that you are a permanent project who never gets to be finished. And that lie is profitable because a person who believes they're never done will keep searching forever, keep consuming, keep doubting the very transformation they've already achieved. So you've been standing on the far side of the work, fully changed, asking the empty air whether you're allowed to stop. You didn't find this video by accident. You came looking for proof, some external confirmation that what you suspect about yourself is real, that the stillness you now carry isn't avoidance, that the distance you feel from your old life isn't a regression but a completion. And by the end of this, you'll have your answer. 7 markers. If you recognize all 7 in yourself, the work isn't ahead of you, it's behind you. And the person reading them will not be the same person who started. Understand what Jung is confessing in that sentence, because it's the entire map. He did not say the most terrifying thing is to face your trauma, or to confront your enemies, or to endure suffering. He said the most terrifying thing is to accept yourself completely, all of it, the light and the buried dark, the noble and the disowned. Because the moment you fully accept yourself, you no longer need the world to do it for you. You stop negotiating, you stop performing, you stop fragmenting yourself into the pieces that other people found acceptable. That total self-acceptance is the destination of all shadow work, and it terrifies people precisely because it's the end of the search. And the search, however painful, was familiar. Completion asks you to put down the only identity you've ever known, the one who's still working on themselves. So, here's what this is in clear terms. This is depth psychology, the study of what actually happens in the psyche when integration finishes its work, not vague spiritual reassurance. I'm going to give you the 7 specific markers of completed individuation, the irreversible shifts Jung identified in the people who finished the descent. I'm going to show you which ones you already have, and I'm going to warn you about the 2 that are most often counterfeited, where numbness disguises itself as peace and avoidance impersonates arrival. Because the cruelest thing that can happen at this stage is to be genuinely done and not know it, and keep digging for wounds that have already closed. By the end, you'll know the difference, and you'll understand the words on that thumbnail, 7 signs you're free, and whether you've actually earned them. If these ideas resonate with you, hit that subscribe button for more top-tier content. Also drop a "arrived" in the comments so I know you're ready. Let's dive in. The first marker is the quietest, and you may have already stopped noticing it because it happened so gradually you no longer need to be understood. Think back to who you used to be. Every decision came with a defense attached. Every boundary required a paragraph of justification. You'd replay conversations for hours, building the case for why you were right, why you were misunderstood, why they should see it your way. Your peace was hostage to other people's comprehension of you. If they didn't get it, you couldn't rest. Here's the uncomfortable truth underneath that old pattern. The compulsion to be understood was never about communication. It was about permission. You needed others to understand you, because their understanding was the only thing that made your choices feel legitimate. You couldn't authorize your own life, so you outsourced the authorization. And the price was that you could never act until the jury came back. And now, watch yourself. You make a decision and someone misreads it, and you feel the old machinery try to start, the urge to explain, to correct the record, to make them see. And it simply doesn't catch. There's nothing to defend because you're no longer on trial. You've become the kind of person who can be completely misunderstood and remain entirely undisturbed because the verdict on your life now comes from inside you and nowhere else. That is the first marker of completed shadow work, and almost no one reaches it. Most people will spend their entire lives explaining themselves to a courtroom that was never even in session. If you've stopped, if being misunderstood now costs you nothing, that's one. Hold it, because the second is even harder to fake. The second marker is what happens to your reactions to other people. The mirror goes quiet. You remember how it used to be. Certain people could send you spiraling with a single trait. The arrogant one, the selfish one, the one who took up all the air in the room. They didn't just annoy you, they activated something in you, a charge far bigger than the situation deserved. You'd carry the irritation home. You'd narrate their flaws to anyone who'd listen. They lived in your head, rent-free. Here's the mechanism Jung exposed, and it's humbling once you see it. The traits in others that enraged you the most were almost always the traits you'd disowned in yourself. The reason the arrogant person infuriated you was that you'd buried your own healthy pride and couldn't bear to see it expressed. The reason the selfish person triggered you was that you'd never let yourself prioritize your own needs. Your strongest reactions to other people were never really about them. They were your own shadow, projected outward, staring back at you through someone else's behavior. So sit with the second moment of discomfort here, because it's a confronting one. For years, the people you judged most harshly were carrying a message about you. Every flare of contempt was a piece of your own exiled self, knocking. You thought you were seeing them clearly. You were mostly seeing your own basement. Now exhale, because here's what completion feels like. When the projections are reclaimed, the mirror goes quiet. The arrogant person speaks and you feel nothing, not suppression, genuine neutrality, because you've integrated your own pride and no longer need to police theirs. The selfish person acts in character, and you observe it the way you'd observe weather, information, not provocation. The people who used to live in your head have quietly moved out because you took back the parts of yourself you'd loaned to their faces. When other people's flaws stop generating heat in you, that's the second marker. And it means the shadow you were chasing has come home. But this is exactly where the path gets dangerous, because the next marker can be real arrival or its most convincing forgery, and almost no one can tell which they have. The third marker is the one the world will misdiagnose every time. Solitude stops hurting. There was a season when being alone was a wound. The silence of an empty evening pressed on you. You filled it with noise, with people who drained you, with anyone, because the alternative was sitting in a quiet that felt like rejection. Aloneness and loneliness were the same thing to you because you had no one inside to keep yourself company. And then, somewhere in the work, it changed. The empty evening stopped aching. The silence became spacious instead of suffocating. You started choosing solitude not as a retreat from people, but as a return to yourself. And you noticed, with something like surprise, that you actually liked your own company. The person you used to flee from at 2 in the morning became someone you were glad to be alone with. That is a genuine marker of completion. Jung saw it clearly, that the individuated person finds in solitude not exile, but home, because they've finally become whole enough to be their own companion. But here is the first reversal. And you must feel the floor shift, because this exact marker has a twin that looks identical from the outside and is its complete opposite from within. That twin is withdrawal as avoidance. There are people who tell themselves they've transcended the need for others when what's actually happened is that they got hurt and quietly decided never to risk connection again. They call their isolation peace. They call their walls wisdom. But it isn't completion. It's a wound that stopped bleeding by refusing to ever be touched. And the tell is precise. True solitude makes you warmer toward the few real people in your life, more present, more available when it counts. Counterfeit solitude makes you colder toward everyone and calls the coldness enlightenment. So ask yourself the brutal question: when you're with the people who genuinely matter, are you fully there, or have you gone numb to them too? If solitude nourishes you and you still open fully to the right ones, that's the third marker, and it's real. If you've simply stopped opening to anyone, that's not arrival. That's a hiding place with good lighting. The fourth marker is the most measurable of all 7. Your old triggers stop firing. Everyone has them. The specific things that used to detonate something in you instantly, a certain tone of voice, a particular kind of criticism, being dismissed, being interrupted, being reminded of an old failure. These weren't decisions, they were reflexes. The trigger fired and you were gone, hijacked by an emotional charge that had been installed long before you had any say in it. When shadow work completes, those charges drain out. Someone says the thing that would have wrecked you a year ago, and you watch yourself stay perfectly level. The old wound gets pressed and there's no scream from underneath, because the wound is actually closed. Not been covered, closed. You've gone back into the original pain, felt it fully, integrated what it was protecting, and now the button connects to nothing. The triggers are dead. But here is the second reversal, and it's the most important warning in this entire video, so do not move past it quickly. There are 2 completely different reasons a trigger goes silent, and they are almost impossible to tell apart from the surface. The first is integration. You faced the wound, felt it completely, and it genuinely resolved. The charge is gone because the conflict is over. That's completion. The second is repression. You didn't integrate the wound, you buried it deeper, and the silence isn't peace. It's a pressure building behind a thicker wall. This is the great counterfeit of shadow work, what Jung would have recognized as the persona hardening rather than the shadow integrating. The person who is repressed rather than integrated also reports feeling nothing when triggered, but it's the nothing of anesthesia, not the nothing of resolution. And here's how you tell them apart, because your whole transformation depends on getting this right. Integration is accompanied by aliveness. When a trigger truly resolves, you feel more, not less, more access to your emotions across the board, more depth, more capacity to be moved by beauty and grief and love. Repression flattens everything. If your triggers went quiet and the rest of your emotional life went quiet with them, you didn't finish the work, you buried it. But if your triggers died and you simultaneously feel more alive, more able to feel everything fully, that's the fourth marker, and it means the wound is genuinely behind you. The fifth marker is a capacity most people never develop in their entire lives. You can hold contradiction without breaking. The unintegrated mind craves resolution. It needs people to be all good or all bad. It needs the world sorted into clean categories, right and wrong, friend and enemy, safe and dangerous. Ambiguity is unbearable to it, because a fragmented self can't tolerate a contradiction it can't resolve. So it splits everything, and it splits other people, and it splits itself, exiling whatever doesn't fit the acceptable story. Jung called the resolution of this the central achievement of individuation, the capacity to hold the opposites. to let two contradictory truths exist at once without collapsing one into the other, to see that a person can love you and fail you, that you can be strong and wounded, that something can be an ending and a beginning in the same breath. The completed psyche stops demanding that reality simplify itself and develops the strength to contain its actual complexity. Watch for this in yourself, because it's subtle and it's profound. You hold a grudge and a genuine compassion for the same person simultaneously without needing to choose. You can acknowledge your own darkness and your own goodness in the same moment without either one cancelling the other. You've stopped needing the world to be simple because you've become whole enough to contain its contradictions inside yourself. That's the fifth marker, and it's the quiet engine underneath your new stability. Because a person who can hold the opposites can no longer be destabilized by a reality that refuses to behave. And notice what's happening as you check these off, because it matters. Most people will never reach a single one of these markers. They'll live and die inside the splitting, inside the projection, inside the endless search. The fact that you're recognizing yourself in these, that the descriptions are landing like memories rather than aspirations, tells you something about which category of person you've become. Two more. The sixth marker is the death of a presence you carried your whole life without naming it. The internal audience disappears. For most people, there is always someone watching. Not a real person, an internalized one. A composite jury of everyone whose approval ever mattered, installed in the mind, narrating your performance, scoring your choices. You felt them when you walked into a room. You felt them when you posted, when you spoke, when you decided. You were never quite alone because the audience came everywhere with you, and you spent enormous energy performing for spectators who existed only in your own head. Here's the uncomfortable truth about that audience. It was the externalized version of a self you hadn't yet claimed. You needed the imagined watchers because you hadn't become your own authority. So you borrowed authority from a phantom crowd and let it run your life from the inside. Every performance was a request for a verdict you couldn't issue yourself. And when the work completes, the audience simply leaves. You catch yourself doing something with no thought of how it looks. You make a choice and realize afterward that you never once consulted the imagined jury, because the jury dissolved when you became the authority it was standing in for. You're not performing anymore. You're just living, witnessed by no one but yourself, and finding that to be entirely enough. The relief of it is enormous and quiet. When you notice the watchers are gone, when you can act in total privacy even in a crowd, that's the sixth marker, and it's the foundation of a freedom most people never taste. The seventh marker is the final one, and it's the most bittersweet. You've grieved who you used to be, and the grief is finished. This is the part nobody warns you about. Completing shadow work means a death. The old self, the one who performed, who explained, who needed the audience and feared the solitude and split the world into simple halves. That self doesn't get upgraded. It dies. And for a while, even as you become someone freer, you mourn it. You miss the simplicity of who you were. You feel the strange grief of having outgrown your own past, of looking at old photographs and old friendships and old versions of your life, and feeling the ache of a distance that can't be uncrossed. Here's what makes this the final marker, rather than just another stage. The unfinished mourn endlessly. They get stuck in the loss, romanticizing who they used to be, half wishing they could go back to the comfort of not knowing what they now know. But completion is when the grief resolves, when you can look at the old self with gratitude instead of longing, thank them for getting you here, and let them rest. The mourning ends, and what's left isn't loss, it's freedom. Clean, settled, irreversible freedom, with no wish to return. That is the seventh marker, and it's the one that seals all the others. because a person who has finished grieving their old self can never accidentally become them again. The door isn't just closed, it's been mourned and accepted and released. If you've grieved who you were and come out the other side feeling not loss but liberation, that's 7. So count them. The end of explaining, the quiet mirror, solitude without ache, the dead triggers, the alive kind, not the buried kind. Holding the opposites, the vanished audience, and the mourning finished. If you recognized yourself in all 7, then hear this clearly, because it's the thing you came looking for. The work is not ahead of you. It is behind you. You are not a permanent project. You are not still broken. You crossed the threshold you've been standing on, possibly a long time ago, and you've been waiting for permission to believe it. This is the permission. You're free, not because the suffering is gone, but because it no longer runs you. That is what individuation produces. Not a person without a shadow, but a person who has met theirs, claimed it, and become whole enough to carry the full weight of being entirely themselves, and understand what that makes you now. Not healed, exactly. Completed. Someone who sees clearly, because they finally know their own darkness. Someone who can be alone without aching and connected without performing. Someone the old triggers can't reach and the imagined audience can't move. The world will sense it in you and won't have a name for it. They'll feel the stillness, the unbothered clarity, the way you can't quite be destabilized anymore, and they'll reach for the nearest word. They'll call it confidence. They won't know it was the long descent into your own shadow that built it. So if you found all 7 in yourself, if this landed not as a goal, but as a recognition of who you've already become, comment the word arrived, not as a boast, as a marker in time, the moment you stopped asking whether you were done and finally accepted that you are. And if you want to keep living from this place, to go deeper into individuation, depth psychology, the real architecture of the completed self, then subscribe, because this is the only place that treats your transformation as finished work to be lived from, not a wound to keep reopening. This is the room for the ones who actually crossed over. Picture it a year from now, already true. You move through your life with a settledness that unnerves the people still searching. The ones who knew the old you will feel that they can no longer quite reach you, and they'll be right. Not because you've grown cold, but because you've grown whole, and wholeness doesn't bend to the old pressures. You'll carry your shadow like a person carries their own shadow on a bright day, always there, fully owned, no longer feared. And whatever you do, don't stop now. The on-screen video matters more than you think. What you've become has a next chapter, and you don't want to meet it unprepared. Trust me, I'll see you there. See what others miss. Know what others fear. Become who others can't.